Mitra, namaskar. I am Abhay Vaidya, Director, Pune International Center. May I request our chief guest, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, to please come on the stage. Dr. Mashelkar, Dr. Vinay Kulkarni, and the author of this biography, Anuradha Mascarenhas. We have an extremely important event today, which is a panel discussion on what Dr. Swaminathan wishes to call is a silent pandemic. I shall leave it to our esteemed speakers to elaborate and enlighten us on what this silent pandemic is all about. We will also ceremoniously release Dr. Swaminathan's biography at the Wheel of Research by our young friend Anuradha Mascarenhas, Senior Editor, Indian Express. Indeed, we are grateful to you, ma'am, for taking the time out and flying in from Delhi, especially for this event. We also wish to thank Dr. Raman Gangakhedkar, who's connected with us online. Dr. Gangakhedkar, could you please switch on your camera so that we can all see you? Thank you very much. Welcome, sir. Dr. Gangakhedkar has connected with us from Mumbai, and I thank him for joining us in this event. And I also wish to thank Dr. Vinay Kulkarni for his presence here today. Dr. Gangakhedkar Padma Shri is a familiar speaker, panelist, and a chair at PIC events. He has done extensive work in HIV/AIDS and was the former head of epidemiology and communicable diseases at the Indian Council of Medical Research. He was also director in charge of the National AIDS Research Institute, Pune. Dr. Vinay Kulkarni is a member of PIC and is the founder, trustee, and coordinator of the Prayas Health Group. He is among India's first physicians who responded to the emerging HIV epidemic in 1986. Dr. Kulkarni firmly believes in community empowerment and has contributed enormously to awareness building, capacity building of community organizations, and advocacy with the National AIDS Control Program. Dr. Swaminathan is presently Principal Advisor, National Tuberculosis Elimination Program. In 2019, she became World Health Organization's first chief scientist, and we are all aware of how she was at the center of the global response to the unprecedented and devastating COVID-19 pandemic. Known for her research in tuberculosis and HIV, she has worked previously as Director, National Institute of Research in Tuberculosis, Chennai, Director General, ICMR, Secretary, Department of Health Research under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and Deputy Director General, World Health Organization. Dr. Swaminathan decided to return to India after a 5-year stint at WHO, and as reported by Indian Express, this was because, and I quote, she felt an urge to do more hands-on practical work and because she wanted to live and work in India. As we all know, Dr. Swaminathan is the daughter of the illustrious father of the Green Revolution of India, Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, Bharat Ratna, and is chairperson of the M.S. Swaminathan Research Foundation. I may mention that she has a strong Pune connect. Dr. Swaminathan earned her MBBS degree from the Armed Forces Medical College, Pune, and MD in Pediatrics from AIIMS, New Delhi. In fact, this book has numerous references to Pune. It starts with your compassion for your pet Dinah, and also of how you cycled from Pune to Lonavala in your student days. We were just speaking about cycling and the state of affairs today. And your love for Irani chai in Pune. But on a more serious note, NIV's maximum containment lab, which is located in Pune at Pashan at biosafety level 4, happened because of Dr. Swaminathan when she was the head of ICMR. Anuradha Mascarenhas is one of India's leading health journalists and happens to be from Pune. Just last week, Anuradha received the prestigious Ladli Media and Advertising Award for gender sensitivity. Congratulations, Anuradha, for your awards and for this wonderful biography which we are releasing today. I would just like to say one last thing. We see the number of testimonies that highly recommend this book, and Dr. Mashelkar calls it a gripping narrative of the inspiring life and work of one of India's foremost health scientists and public policy leaders of our time. Uh, Kiran Mazumdar Shaw says this biography not only showcases Dr. Swaminathan's resilience as a woman researcher and her dedication to translating research into impactful programs, it also sheds light on her instrumental role at the height of the COVID 19 pandemic, as we all know. We will now have the welcome address by our President PIC, Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar, followed by the book release ceremony and the panel discussion. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Abhay. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Dr. Vinay Kulkarni, Dr. Raman Gangakhedkar, who is joining us virtually. You know, there was an unfortunate accident to Mrs. Gangakhedkar. She had a fracture, hospitalized, and he's unable to come here, but it was so gracious of him to sort of join us virtually. Anuradha and the distinguished members of PIC, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to extend a very warm welcome to you all. I do know we are in the midst of the Ganesh Chaturthi festival, and still you have found time to come here. We really appreciate that. A special welcome to Soumya Swaminathan. I've been personally a great admirer of both her father and herself. Her legendary father, Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, I would say one and only Dr. Bharat Ratna Dr. Swaminathan, and his equally illustrious daughter, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. Again, I would say one and only Soumya Swaminathan. It's amazing when I think about it. I was just mentioning to her that you may create finally a record of both the father and daughter becoming Bharatratnas at one point in time. And I also told her I'm 81 going to 82, so make it happen before I go away. That was my promise to her. But that is just to sort of tell you how much I sort of admire her. And Abhay, you have done a very good job in terms of talking about her life, her work. And I watched her with great admiration, both as a scientist as well as a science leader, both actually. And she excelled in both, right from National Institute of Research for Tuberculosis to her Director Generalship of ICMR to WHO Chief Scientist. That entire journey, on, as I like to call it, a ladder of excellence, with an exponential sort of rise. I mean, she has done that. I had the privilege of reading the book, by the way, Anuradha, from page to page, first page to the last page. Whenever I write something, I read everything, and I must tell you it's a fascinating book. You read some part of what I said, but I'll read the full part. I had said that a gripping narrative of the inspiring life and work of India's foremost health, science, and public policy leaders of our time. And I repeat that. You know, she indeed is. As the first chief scientist of WHO, the amazing way in which Soumya Swaminathan turbocharged the whole science portfolio of WHO, and I mean turbocharged, while handling unprecedented challenges. And she had two challenges, Mohan. One was COVID-19 pandemic, and the other was also misinformation pandemic. You will all remember those sort of times, and she handled it absolutely brilliant. And has been brilliantly captured. And then I endorse by saying that this unputdownable book is a must read for one for all. And I also am sort of hoping that each one of you will be able to read that book. You can, by the way, it's not a big book. It's in one sitting, you can actually read it. And the narrative, thank you, Anuradha, is so wonderful. It just flows, actually. Really, really an enjoyable experience. And also, it is highly inspirational. I was just telling Soumya that my granddaughter, Ananya, she is in BJ Medical College. And I gave the book to her, presented that book to her. And she's so inspired. So anybody asks her, what do I want to become? She said, I want to become Soumya. I think this is the inspiration. That's why I'm very happy and grateful to both of you that you forced her to agree to write. I know that she was the reluctant sort of, yeah, I know. So that's what it is. And we welcome you to Pune. You are not new to Pune, like you mentioned in the book, and you also mentioned with MBBS from FNC. But you are also not new to Pune International Center. As you know, it is one of the foremost think tank of the country today. And I remember very fondly the sixth Pune Dialogue on National Security in 2021, when we had this particular theme of national security preparedness in the age of pandemics and disasters. And we couldn't think of anyone better than you. And I remember contacting you in Geneva, and I know you were in the midst of handling all the COVID challenges, and yet you came, sort of participated, and sort of inspired us. So, really, Pune International Center is something that is close to your heart. I don't want to sort of extend my opening remarks. I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Raman Gangakhedkar as well as Dr. Vinay Kulkarni for joining us today. And we are really looking forward to an intellectually stimulating, enlightening, and I'm sure very inspiring conversation this morning. So thank you all very much. I look forward to the next 60 minutes or so. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we are celebrating the launch of the very special book now, At the Wheel of Research, a work that has been eagerly awaited and promises to inspire and provoke thought in equal measure. May I request Dr. Mashelkar to do the honors, please. Thank you. We now begin the panel discussion on the silent pandemic, which will be moderated by Anuradha Mascarenhas.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I really want to thank Dr. Mashelkar and the entire team at BIC for this wonderful event. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful. I'm extremely excited, but I'm a little nervous. Moderating this very, very dynamic panel in just an hour on the very broad theme of the silent pandemic is a little bit of a challenge. However, we all know that the pandemic has impacted our lives. The world is no longer the same as it was before. It's pretty uncertain, and infections are emerging, re-emerging, and with the rapidity and the frequency that it is very difficult to kind of keep track. So the esteemed panel, Dr. Gangakhedkar and everybody, we had a discussion, and we said that we will talk about infectious diseases, especially related to how prepared we are, the kind of planetary approach, the kind of risks and that we anticipate, and the kind of roles and responsibilities, the challenges that we now face. So considering that we have very limited time, I'm just going to start with some housekeeping rules. I will invite each panelist to talk for 5 minutes each on the subject. This will be followed by a question answer round, and then we want to open it up to the audience for a more engaging and a more kind of interactive kind of session. So I think I'll start with Dr. Swaminathan first, followed by Dr. Gangakhedkar, and then Dr. Vinay Kulkarni. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Anuradha. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Mashelkar, for your remarks, and also to the Pune International Center for this invitation. Dr. Vaidya, thank you very much. I know that it's taken some time to get the dates organized, but delighted to be in Pune today and meet so many friends here as well. Good evening, and thank you all for coming. So, um, I think that the world is at I would say, quite a critical phase in terms of even the very survival of the planet and the human race. And it sounds very sort of scary, or almost like a science fiction kind of scenario. But actually, the scientists who work in this area, they have put forward all the facts that we have so many tipping points as far as the planet is concerned, and we have already crossed. There are about 9 planetary tipping points that are accepted, and we're already at the brink or crossed over in about 6 of them. So tipping point generally means that there is no return. So there's a very scary scenario to think that in terms of climate change and in terms of the over exploitation of natural resources that the human race has inflicted on the planet, uh, at the cost of all other species, that we might be at a point where things are just become almost impossible for life. And while none of us may be alive at that time, because planetary timelines run in the thousands, if not in the millions, but the fact is that by 2050, what the IPCC says is that if we cross 2.7 degrees, which is what is predicted to happen now, unless we change course, then things become so difficult that even for survival, many parts of the world, and unfortunately, India and many countries in Asia will be impacted, will become unlivable. So I think that's just something to keep at the back of our mind, because, or it should be front of our mind actually, that everything we do today, we can either contribute to that downward slide, or we can pull ourselves and try to go, well, we can't travel backwards, but we can stop that hurtling into the abyss. We can slow it down. And it is possible. Again, scientists believe that if we stop emitting more greenhouse gases, what is called, the zero goal, zero carbon that we talk about, it will take time, but temperatures could eventually reduce. So we're already at about 1 degrees, 1.1 degrees. So by 2030, they say anywhere between 1.5 and 2. So what in 2015 countries committed to stopping greenhouse gas emissions, getting to zero emissions by 2030, all that is very far away from on the trajectory today. And it's basically because we're still fossil fuel dependent and the consumption patterns are increasing. Now, of course, there's also the issue of equity, that all countries did not contribute to this, that the high income countries, the rich countries, what we call the developed countries, did contribute significantly more greenhouse gases. But as we are catching up, India, Africa, etc., we are also emitting more, even though the per capita consumption today is still very low. I would say maybe 1/10, an Indian consumes 1/10 of the carbon budget that maybe somebody who lives in the US is consuming. But our population is huge. And so if you multiply that by 1.4 billion, then it becomes a lot of carbon emission. Now, I would say that that is probably the biggest and perhaps silent threat, because we do see disasters in the newspapers every day being reported in some part. But last year it was reported that in 85% of the days of the year, there was a disaster in some part of the country or the other. There could have been a drought somewhere, a flood somewhere, a cyclone somewhere. You see all these heavy rain days when you get 40, 50, 80 inches of rain in a day. So some part of the country exhibited, and 8 out of 10 Indians today are climate vulnerable. And for people like me who live in a coastal city like Chennai, Chennai may not exist, Mumbai may not exist by 2100, the rate at which the seas rising. Now, related to that, of course, is the uh, emergence or re-emergence of many infectious diseases. And someone was saying that, somebody couldn't come today for the evening because hospitals are all full of people with all infectious diseases. We have everything combined, and sometimes we don't even know what you have. Is it dengue? Is it chikungunya? Is it H1N1? Is it COVID? Because all of these are circulating, and we know that when the vector-borne diseases increase after rains, because the mosquitoes are able to breed, and particularly with the type of urban environment we have today, the Aedes mosquito, the vector for dengue and chikungunya, is able to really thrive in this urban environment and breed very well. And while we were all focusing on reducing malaria, dengue, chikungunya, Zika, and many others which are spread by the Aedes mosquito have really learned how to survive. It's the fastest growing epidemic in the world today. If you look at dengue all over Southeast Asia, Latin America, possibly very soon Africa as well. And it's being able to survive in climates which it could not earlier. Because again, with warming, it's going further. So Europe never had dengue, never seen it before. They're also getting dengue now, and so on. The collector of Ooty told me recently that they have now the mosquitoes in Ooty, which was never heard of because mosquitoes could not survive in that climate. But Ooty is warm. Ladakh reached 35 degrees this summer, and there was no snow on many of the mountains. So these are all symptoms of the global warming, and so the new infectious diseases are coming because of many reasons. One is that the vectors are able to survive and thrive. The second is that this, if we go back to COVID and how it arose, of course, we still don't have the final or the last word on the origin of the pandemic. And that's a question many people still have. Where did it come from, this SARS-CoV-2? How did it arise? And how did it get into humans? And of course, there are many hypotheses and theories. The major theories on the table were and still continue to be: one, animal to human, which is what most scientists think is the most likely. Bats have thousands of coronaviruses in them. And so the previous coronaviruses, that is the SARS-1 and the MERS, these are the other two coronaviruses that infected humans, came through an animal. In the case of SARS-1, it was the civet cat, and in the case of MERS, it is a dromedary camel in the Middle East. They become a host. They don't necessarily get sick, but humans, they keep on mutating till they're able to jump from one species to another species, and then they mutate some more so they can spread from human to human. Only till when that happens does it become dangerous for us, because then we can spread it from one person to another. So that's what happened with SARS-1, but the difference there was that people got very sick. They got extremely sick. There was a high mortality as well. And so they had such severe symptoms, they had to present to the hospital. And so it was relatively easy to identify such people and to quarantine their contacts. And that's how that outbreak was stopped. There were about, I think, 12,000 cases globally and about 800 deaths. But it was controlled in 8 months. With the SARS-CoV-2, the virus was so transmissible, and the fact that so many people were asymptomatic, that it was impossible to contain. So that's the issue with the airborne transmission, is that you can't always, it's very hard to contain. And the estimate today is that a virus that originates in one part of the world can go to the other side of the world within 24 to 36 hours because of the way we're all connected. Even from a remote village, they say that in 24 to 36 hours it can spread. So if you really want to contain it at source, it's going to require a lot of work. So I think vectors, the jumps from species, again, why is it more common? Well, we are cutting forests, we are encroaching on land which was otherwise occupied by wild animals, more contact between wild animals, domesticated animals. In fact, in Ladakh, I was reading that the dogs, which were domestic dogs, are now feral dogs. And they're also mating with the wolves, and they're becoming like, these roaming packs, which are actually going around and attacking a lot of the smaller wildlife over there. So as we change our environment, animals are also changing their behavior, adapting. And then, of course, there's the illegal trade in wildlife, which also promotes the spread of infectious diseases because animals are shipped across the world and then they're all kept closely packed together in the kind of wet markets that China has, very making it easy for viruses to jump from one species to another and to get maybe evolved into new things. So that is most likely how SARS-CoV-2 came about, but we don't have definitive proof and we don't know which intermediate host was involved because we really don't have the data. China did not share despite the best efforts of WHO. So the other theories, of course, on the table are that it was a lab leak, accidental lab leak, because there are many labs around the world that work on coronaviruses. There can always be a biosafety issue and a leak. And then there was also the theory that it was an engineered virus, which I think very few people believe that that was the case. So I think that's kind of the background for the thing. But when I said silent pandemic, in my mind was tuberculosis, because tuberculosis is an ancient disease. It's been with human beings for a very long period of time. It's learned to live with humans. It infects many mammals, and it we human beings have not been able to find really the tools. Unlike COVID, where we were able to find the tools very quickly, we have not succeeded. I think it's only lack of effort, frankly. There are scientific challenges, we can come to that, but I don't think those are insurmountable challenges that we cannot do if we have a mission and we have the will to do it. So, why is it silent? Because 1,000 people die every day just in India alone, and TB is a number one killer globally of infection. It's always been at the well, HIV/AIDS was number one killer for infectious disease for a few years, but then again we were able to find the drugs. And why? Because it affected rich countries, people who are very well educated and vocal. The gay community in the high income countries became powerful advocates for change. They insisted and ensured that government invest money, and we today have drugs where you can live a life, a relatively good quality life with antiretroviral drugs. We still don't have a vaccine, of course. For TB, unfortunately, it affects the poor and the poorest of the poor in developing countries, and therefore it's a very low priority. Most high income countries have contained it many years ago. So it goes with development, good nutrition, good housing, good ventilation, etc. It's an airborne infection. So it continues to kill 1.5 million people at least every year and infect 10 million or more new cases every year, but it doesn't at all get the attention. Uh, and I'm always amazed that dengue death usually finds its place on the front page of the newspaper because the dengue death usually happens in a city, and it's very unfortunate. Any death is unfortunate, but when it happens to somebody who's relatively well off living in a city, it comes into the headlines. But 1,000 people die of TB every day. Only people like Anuradha, of course, and a few others write about it all the time to remind us, but it doesn't get the attention it needs. So we can talk a little bit more later, but yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for those opening remarks. Dr. Gangakhedkar, would you please address us, and also Dr. Kulkarni? Then we'll start with the questions.
I must thank PIC to have invited me to this interesting event, and I must also thank Dr. Soumya to have introduced this particular concept beautifully of silent pandemic. To me, a pandemic has to be an infectious event. Unfortunately, today people are using that word pretty loosely, even for non-infectious or non-communicable disease. But at the same time, there are certain characteristics which warn us, that we are perhaps crossing the line. This is mainly because now, of recent, all of us have heard of COVID and the zoonotic diseases that spill over into human beings because of the climate change, which Dr. Soumya was referring to. This climate change has actually led to blurring the line of actual control between the zoonotic organisms and also the human beings. And therefore, perhaps what we are seeing is a reflection of new and newer diseases that are coming. But the moment we say silent, silent could mean multiple things to many people. Silent would essentially mean something that is spreading, we don't recognize it as important. Silent could also mean that all these events that are occurring do not produce these many events. To give you a simpler example, now that we are just around exit of this COVID era, even today you tend to hear of the KP.2 variant that is circulating across in the world. So is that not a pandemic? It is a pandemic. Do we hear about it so much? We don't, because this perhaps is one which is highly transmittable kind of a virus, and it doesn't have the severity impact on severity so adverse as we had seen earlier in the COVID epidemic. So a classical example of a silent pandemic is still, it continues to be what we are witnessing in terms of SARS-CoV-2, that is this KP.2 virus that is currently in circulation. But which are the ones, to my mind, which are more worrisome? We need to worry about not only those that are currently existent and tend to produce small outbreaks which are not recognized. So one example we are seeing currently, which is being talked of monkeypox. You have Congo Crimean hemorrhagic virus, which tends to occur in Gujarat, and it has infected many states. If you actually go for a sero survey among different animals and even the people who take care of these animals. So even CCH is something which is an important virus to my mind. If you actually look at another unknown threat so far, you must have read reports that as the ice in Antarctic is melting, there were close to about 200 new pathogens which were noticed by scientists, and they are worried. Now we don't know if this climate change occurs rapidly, whether these are also likely to be capable of posing a threat to humanity per se. But which is truly, I'm not going to cover tuberculosis because Dr. Soumya has already talked about it. The true silent pandemic as of now is perhaps still antimicrobial resistance. And the sole reason is it tends to occur, people don't care about it, people continue to take antibiotics over the counters, they don't complete the dosages. Neither chemists are worried about whether I should give this antibiotic to them because of their own private profit related motives per se. When it comes to doctors, because of non-availability of different diagnostic tests which can be offered at point of care, so that you can take a decision whether I should give antibiotic and if I have to for which organism. Not all these tests are available or accessible to every doctor, and whatever is available, even among them, the cost tends to be very high. And so there is an indiscriminate use of antibiotics, which has been leading to increase in deaths because of drug-resistant bacteria, which is classically called as AMR or antimicrobial resistance. Now, what is worrisome? Most of us will not recognize it as important because this tends to happen in only those who have been admitted in hospitals, especially in intensive care units. So you cannot so easily say what is the burden of this AMR in general population. In general population, it would always come out low, and therefore the likelihood that our responses may not be adequate continues to be high. Even to this date, whatever deaths that are occurring, it is predicted that by 2050, close to about 10 million people are likely to die due to AMR. Now, why we need to worry about these? We also know that the antibiotic pipeline is small. It's very difficult to produce new and newer antibiotics, especially those antibiotics that can be from different classes. By and large, all antibiotics that come, one of the risks is they come from a particular class, and that's not something which is desirable. What is worse, can we make people's behavior change? Very difficult to do. You have to educate them. And at the same time, we also need to remember that educating people for COVID related preventive behaviors was far more easier because there was a visibility of what happens once you acquire COVID. So that ensured that people understood and followed the same. Would that happen for antimicrobial resistance? Perhaps not. Because these people are dying in the hospitals, only those small number of affected people in that family will understand, and we don't know whether they will be spreading that message across. So AMR is going to become a major issue. And at the same time, we all need to remember that neither coronaviruses have gone nor influenza, which tends to come as a seasonal event. But that seasonal event occurs in almost all countries. So it essentially is also a pandemic and a preventive, uh, easily preventable kind of a disease. One needs to take that vaccine annually and things can be different. But these are going to be major challenges that will come. We do not know which of them will produce a kind of a bacteria or a virus which will have higher severity of a disease and start killing, and then people tend to get attracted towards or willing to listen about those particular diseases. So silent pandemics are going to occur. Silent pandemics, we will need to worry about it. We need to be prepared for the same. Over.
First of all, thanks for inviting me. And I think Soumya suggested my name. I was surprised because there are two people on the panel who have been international people, and they have called someone who is too local, restricted to Pune. But now that you have defined the things, I was trying to think about silent pandemics in a slightly different way. And one of the things which came to my mind is why we are vulnerable. And HIV is a very classical example of the virus spreading in the community for almost 20 years, 25, 30 years. Until 1981, no one knew about it. So it was not something that, like COVID, it happened in October and then we came to know about in Jan and then we responded, kind of a thing. We knew that some parts which were poor parts, and you mentioned about that, like it was spreading in Africa, it was spreading elsewhere where there were poor people dying, and we were not aware of that. When it reached the US and the rich people, and then there were 10 cases, and then you start saying that there is a new disease. So it tells us that whatever we have achieved, human race is still highly vulnerable to things. And we have to keep it in mind that there are things which could happen anytime. So, as already mentioned about this interaction with different vectors, animals, and kind of things, we are coming in more and more in contact with things which were not exposed to in the past. And so, there are going to be new things that are likely to happen. But if we want to look at this phenomenon of hidden pandemics, we always keep on thinking about things which are underground and kind of happening. But I would like to also bring this to the table because we all the time keep on talking about climate change, and majority of the discussion is about uh, mitigation, net zero, reducing the emissions and kind of things. But there is much less work, research, talk about adaptation, because whatever we do, things are going to happen. And it is the most vulnerable of the communities who are going to face the consequences of all this. And then dengue is a very classical example of an hidden epidemic. Are we talking so much about dengue as we were talking about COVID? We are not. In Pune, almost every other person is sick right now, but there are no deaths. And what we are doing is providing kind of prescriptive solutions that you go to the hospital, if you have a seat, you go there. It is largely asymptomatic, you spread out of your pocket. But we forget that it's largely preventable epidemic. And we are not, a very interesting thing happens is if you have chikungunya or dengue in your home, the people from corporation come and start finding out the larvae. But this could have been done 4 weeks back when everyone knew that the rains are going to subside, the temperature is going to go up. So there is a large role of, one thing is the public health systems which have to be responsible. We should start giving less importance, not less importance, because out of pocket expenditures and insurances and seeing that the old people get their medicines in the tertiary care is very important. But the huge neglect our country has towards primary care and preventive care is, I think, should be addressed first, and that is going to prevent a lot of these silent pandemics. Second thing is lack of data also. So unless we have good surveillance systems, unless we have good data coming out, unless we have that data available for researchers from all the institutions, from the government institutions, outside the institutions for analysis and suggesting things, and we have think tanks like PIC, which talk about these things, convey their messages to the right people, and they are taken into consideration, I think there are going to be a lot of silent pandemics. Now, for example, tuberculosis. Now we are talking of tuberculosis, but tuberculosis was always, I think, even at the height of COVID pandemic, tuberculosis was still killing more people than the COVID people, COVID affected people. But now that COVID is gone, we are talking about these infections. Another thing is mpox. It is coming up. How is mpox getting transmitted? Probably the nucleotide is being transmitted more of sexual contacts or kind of thing. And if you ask me as a sexual infectious disease consultant, there is a silent epidemic going on, and it will spread also, of sexually transmitted infections which are coming back, which are going to affect so many lives of young people and kind of things. So it's not just emerging infections, it is not just new and there would be the infections that may come, but it is what we have right now and which is going on, either because it is not killing people or it is not that dangerous or it's not seen, but there could be still so many silent things. They may not be called in the classical definitions as pandemics, but I think there are a lot of silent health issues which are going on, and they are going to affect our health in that way, because climate change, we know that dengue, for example, is spreading to new states. Now, some years back, maybe about 15 years back, there were around 4 or 5 states in India which were reporting dengue. Now, there is not a single state which is not reporting dengue. That is about climate change. New countries are getting affected, but dengue doesn't kill. So, you can have hospitals, you can have paracetamol, you can give money to the people. But what about the morbidity? What about the loss of wages? What about the economic impacts of all these things? All this has to come into the discussion when we talk of silent pandemics and silent epidemics.
Thank you. All of you all have beautifully introduced the subject. So, I am not going to again ask questions on those lines, but specifically on TB and mpox. Ma'am, TB is a national priority. And we understand that the short treatment regimen for MDR TB is now on the anvil. Trainings have begun. However, evidence is showing that asymptomatic cases are there of TB. So, what kind of challenges do you expect? Since it's been such a long time for TB to be cured or prevented, and so, what do you think about that? And on mpox, I'm coming back to you all.
Thank you. And I want to, agree and endorse what both Dr. Gangakhedkar and Vinay have said. And they've made very good points. Especially the role of prevention and health promotion, I think is, without that, I think our health expenditure is going to keep increasing and without really a benefit to the health of the community. So it's in a very dangerous place if you only treat those who become ill, don't really focus on preventing illness. So on TB, there are some scientific challenges as far as this Mycobacterium tuberculosis is concerned. It's an intracellular organism, and we know that you can get infected and you don't have to get sick. That MTB can be hidden in your body for a long time. It could flare up at a time when your body's immune system weakens, either due to malnutrition or due to diabetes or could be HIV. So essentially, it's an interplay between the immune system and the bacterium. Most of us get exposed at some point of our life, usually when we are young, children or adolescents, but we don't get TB. Um, but if you do a skin test, what's called the Mantoux test, or now there are blood tests and things you can do, you can detect the fact that you were infected and exposed, but you were able to contain the infection. So there is that immune control of TB, which is not well understood. So that's why I'm saying that there are very big gaps in the scientific understanding, particularly of how the immune system controls TB. Once you understand that, you can make a vaccine. And so the benefit we had with COVID and with some other viruses and bacteria for which we do have currently vaccines is the clear relationship between an antibody response and the control of the infection. Whereas in TB, there is nothing like that. So we still don't understand. So I think we need much more. That's why we need scientific investment and research in order to understand both how it spreads, the airborne transmission. Many engineers got into the act during COVID, if you remember, to find out how COVID is spreading. And they did all these very beautiful studies of what comes out of your mouth when you speak. You don't even have to cough, just speak or sing or laugh. And there are particles of different sizes that are coming out of us. Some of them will fall to the ground, the larger ones, some of them will stay suspended in the air for a long period of time. And that is how we saw COVID transmitting even for people who are not in very close contact. So again, MTB, we don't fully understand how it is spreading, how much contact do you need, how many bacteria do you need, etc. So a lot of work to be done on transmission. And then on the treatment, it's still a long and toxic treatment, relatively speaking. You have to take drugs for many, many months. And if you have multi-drug resistant TB, then the drugs are quite toxic. Side effects are there. You give up on treatment. It really becomes a battle between your tolerating the drugs and being able to fight the infection. So we do need much more research into better, shorter treatment regimens. And finally, for COVID, where we started with, of course, the PCR and very few labs being able to do it, we ended up with these beautiful, simple tests. Get up in the morning, do a self-test. Within a minute, you have the result. You can decide whether you're infected, you should stay at home, or whether you can go to work. We didn't have that for any other infectious disease. In such a quick time, scientists were able to develop these beautiful rapid tests. So for TB, if you had a rapid test, a point of care test where you could put it in the mouth, the people are now working on a tongue swab your tongue, and they expect that the MTB DNA will be on the tongue if you're infected. And if you're able to detect it like a point of care test, then imagine that would be a game changer. You could just test yourself, or even a community health worker could test people like we do the malaria rapid test and find, okay, you've got high chance of TB. It may not be a 100% perfect test, but a high chance of TB. Dr. Mashelkar was just telling me, of course, he's like, could be called father of innovation in India, I think, or the innovation ecosystem in India. And he was telling about the latest artificial intelligence based sensors where you just cough into a mobile phone, and the mobile phone has the algorithm which will tell you a high chance this person actually has TB just from analyzing the cough, compared to somebody who has a cold or somebody who has COPD. And then the health worker could say, hey, your cough sounds like it could be TB. Let's do the next test on you, which should be a molecular test. That also should be result available within a few minutes. There's now the X-ray. With a handheld X-ray, you can go door to door. Within a few minutes, take the X-ray, the AI algorithm. In that little camera, it looks like small machine. You don't even have a radiologist. You can have somebody trained because the artificial intelligence algorithm is going to give you, this X-ray looks abnormal, might well be TB. Do the next test. And then you do the next test, which should be a very sensitive test and a specific test, and you diagnose TB. Those are the game-changing technologies we have to There are innovators who've made it happen in India and abroad, but we need to adopt them into our program, and we have to. And you mentioned the asymptomatic or the subclinical TB. So ICMR did the National TB Prevalence Survey. It was done in fact at the height of the COVID pandemic. So amazing that that was done very well. That actually showed that more than half of people who turned out to have infectious TB had very few symptoms, not enough for them to go to a doctor even. That means we have a lot of people infectious in the community. The only way you can find them is to go with a handheld X-ray and do this. It has to be cheap, it has to be affordable, it has to be a good test. So digital technologies today, which have transformed our lives today, everybody is paying with a QR code and a GPay. No need to carry cash or a credit card. Digital has not made that impact in health, including AI, but even without AI, I think the way in which we can diagnose, prevent, detect, health promote, all of that we need to move. Complete digital revolution needs to come, and it can happen in India because we already have the infrastructure in place. So I think those are going to be some of the game changers. You talked about data. I think our data systems are not really conducive today to being able to use the data. We're generating huge amounts of data, but it's all lying somewhere in silos. Nobody is really using it in the way in which it could be used actually to make the change.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's really a kind of a little scary scenario that you're painting. However, from TB, I want to move on to Mpox because India has detected the first case, and we know cases are there worldwide. So, two questions. Dr. Gangakhedkar, how do you think it's going to play out in the country, Mpox? And Dr. Kulkarni, I would want you to address on the stigma because I know it's very difficult to diagnose for healthcare workers because the symptoms are similar to other infections. We are not scientific people, but if you could expand as to how people can, the communities can be encouraged and not to have this stigma, and there should be prevention and those aspects, the community behavioral change. Dr. Gangakhedkar, you go first.
Thank you. No, this is about Mpox that you are asking. Hello?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, sir. Mpox, to my mind, has been there for ages. No? As we hear, the virus was discovered long time back in 1958 in Denmark. And then by then, once it was discovered, we started recognizing that small outbreaks tend to occur. And these were essentially from animals to human beings. They occur in Congo, and that was it that we knew. But those occurrences were through interaction between animals, which actually brought in infection into human beings. But human to human transmission was not seen so much. Unfortunately, the whole thing started sometime around 2010, that there was a slight recognition that human to human transmission has also got to be recognized. When we saw that among pregnant women also, a small number, there was mpox was also there, the agent which infected them. So now that it has come, people were looking essentially at the clade 2 little more rigorously. And when it came to phylogenetic studies, which we actually needed at that point in time, we did not pay so much of attention to clade 1. And what has happened of recent, that clade 1 has diverged into clade 1b, which is sexually transmitted as it is understood as of now. Though one must also say we don't have very definitive evidences because the numbers are so small, it's difficult to conduct all kinds of studies which would bring out robust evidences. What is happening in India? India continues to get phase 2B still. And phase 2B and phase 1B has lot of differences. If sexual transmission doesn't occur, perhaps the risk is going to be lower. But this risk is still going to be lower with 1B, even if it comes in India, because within 3 to 5 days of occurrence of fever, skin lesions start occurring, and therefore you can easily detect an index case and perhaps try to isolate that or avoid having sexual activities with that person. Now that's something which would be something which could protect us for a long period of time. And look at the population base that we have, which would be vulnerable. We would say all those who are below the age of 45 will continue to remain vulnerable, because those who are above 45 have already received smallpox vaccine. Therefore, they are protected largely against monkeypox infection at this point in time. Do I think this will spread more? This can spread more essentially if male to female transmission may occur with a higher transmission efficiency. It is still not documented so far as different studies have taken place at this juncture. It is essentially found among males. And one good feature that the country has is all the males who tend to have multiple partners, they are being covered through national AIDS control programs, focused intervention strategy for HIV itself, HIV, STD, or even hepatitis C to some extent. Now, if even if there is a small threat, perhaps we have an infrastructure which can reach those men who could be at a higher risk of acquiring this infection or passing it to others, and perhaps stop that. So, to me, the visibility of an index case and invisibility that we were worried about in COVID will make a difference surely. To me, mpox may not spread as rapidly or has not spread as rapidly. If you actually look at the raw evidence that one could talk about, you will find that our cases in 2022-23 outbreak that occurred where it reached about 80 countries, we continue to have small numbers. No, they were just around 30 even today, no, from 2022. So its transmission efficiency or potential to infect others continues to be low. So I would not be much worried about it. And at the same time, we must remember for COVID, we have trained all the doctors or healthcare providers or all ancillary staff about how to do barrier nursing, how they can protect themselves from such infections. It can be brought out very quickly, to my mind. And there are drugs and vaccines which are also available, though we don't have access as of now. But if it comes to that, perhaps all our generic manufacturers can ensure that the tablets or injections can be provided of various drugs. And what is also equally important is our vaccine manufacturers have also started working on monkeypox vaccine, which can be used to prevent the occurrence of this infection among exposed people and also try to reduce viremia.
Gangakhedkar, I think we are going to really running out of time, but Dr. Kulkarni, I'd like you to talk about, how community behavior changes can control this outbreak before I now start opening questions from the audience. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, I completely agree that mpox is not going to be a big issue. The problem is, sorry, not talking about you, but the media wants to have some good news or news, So for a long time, if something happens in some corner and you report, people are getting afraid more about
So
all
there are
those
deaths
things.
worldwide.
No,
Deaths have been reported.
no, deaths have been reported. Just a death doesn't make any difference. People are dying anyway. Are you reporting? I'm not saying it is not important. What I'm saying is it's not going to be a pandemic like any other disease. So the point is ki, when the mpox is here, mpox is declared as a virus of concern. That's a different kind of a stage where WHO says that how the preparedness should be there, how the surveillance should be there. That is, but the common person feels that, oh God, there is something new, and in about 14 days I'm going to get it. And then if I get it, then there is a 10% chance that I'm going to die, kind of a thing. That's one thing. And it's not about only mpox, it's about all. Even in COVID, a new variant has come, where somewhere, but is it infectious, is it deadly? That information is not transmitted to people. Second thing is, communities understand things from a very different perspective. And Dr. Gangakhedkar was saying this, that actually during the COVID time, he said that people learned about it very rapidly. But that time we were saying that it took us 20 years for the people to understand how to prevent STIs and HIV. It was a remarkable thing that when it started affecting us, we tried to learn very rapidly about how to avoid a respiratory disease or something. So the point is, when the communities get involved into things, it needs a very different kind of a strategy. And HIV, why India's HIV program has been so successful, or one of the most successful programs, is because the communities, the most vulnerable people, were actually involved in thinking about the epidemic and the kind of responses right from the beginning. And very simple things also, like Soumya did talk about all kind of technologies, but unless, even in tuberculosis, the communities are involved to understand things, what is being done, why it is being done, what we should do, etc. Otherwise, this whole thing of climate change, urbanization, people moving from rural areas to urban areas, the slums, so much of overcrowding, these are the breeding grounds for that. Now, you just have a technology, you identify everyone, treat everyone, and think that tuberculosis will go. It's not going to go. We have to have the social determinants also addressed, because a very simple thing about tuberculosis was eliminated from the developed world before the first drug came. And even today, in spite of so much of travel and kind of thing, there are bacterial criteria, etc. Still, it's not a rapidly spreading pandemic in the developed world, despite so many people from India, Africa going to Europe, traveling and kind of thing. So there are other issues also which help us. And I think not creating fear, because fear-based messaging does not change the behaviors, is a long time kind of it's a lesson we have learned a very long time back, and whatever, like, but the stigma, reduction of stigma, and even it's, for example, mpox, it's very easy to diagnose because the clinical signs are quite classical. So once you have the doctors who are trained, I think it won't be very difficult to diagnose that. And then isolation and then treatment. And it's not a deadly disease in that sense, because majority of the cases are going to be self-limiting. But again and again, unless the communities are involved, just the infrastructure development doesn't work. And a classical example I would give is preventing accidents. You increase the infrastructure, you have good roads, etc. But unless the people follow the traffic rules, accidents are not going to go down. And that's true about all infections. If your vulnerability, you are not taking into your own hands, you are not going to work with the people and understand, then the infections are going to happen.
So at this point, I am very, very impressed, and we hope to have such visible role models like all of you all in public health, and we should have more like you all. But at this point, I have a lot of questions in my head, but still I am going to take the opportunity to open this to the audience, where I will ask if anybody wants to ask questions, but please keep them short, because we want more and more people to ask questions since we have a fantastic panel. So, yeah.
I'm Shripad Mirashi. You mentioned about the device to detect the TB. As a matter of fact, one of the awardees of PIC, Social Innovation Awards, he had developed this instrument and he is using it in the villages. I can give you the details of this. It is based on the patient has to only cough, and then he catches that, and whether he is having TB or not is able to tell.
So thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Anybody wants to ask any specific question? Yes, please go ahead.
I'm Dr. Samir Shah. I'm a preventive radiologist based in Pune. I just would like to know about, during any pandemic or any major health issue on a global scale, if it is there, there have been many idea challenge programs which have been started. Even in India, there was a good response to these idea challenge programs. So, in terms of ensuring accessible, affordable, and sustainable healthcare, let it be in any segment, private, public, or any. So, do you feel that we need to really go on this mode? Let it be termed as crowdsourcing or very large scale idea challenge programs?
Question is addressed to.
No, certainly. I think, our country is full of absolutely bright people and a lot of ideas, a lot of innovation is happening. And there's any number of data now to show how innovation has gone up. So I think what you need to do is really think through the challenge and then pose the question in the right way to get the right answer. There's a lot of community based knowledge as well and traditional knowledge. And sometimes we're just excluding that or forgetting about it and thinking that only new technologies can solve all the problems. Actually, there's traditional knowledge can solve many of the problems, I think, related to climate change. And I think this community based approach, I'd really like to underline what Vinay was saying, that we are excluding lots of people now actually from participating in this. So I think it has to be technology used wisely and appropriately, not for the sake of technology. But certainly, I think technology today has made a big difference in our lives. And for example, communication, through mobile phones. So, but coming to your very specific question, I think that the way to move ahead really is for India to use our own human resources and infrastructure to solve our own public health and problems and societal challenges. And I think we have many, of course, challenges today. And you need an interdisciplinary approach to solve something like dengue. A lot of it is to do with the way we are developing our infrastructure, but a lot of it is also to do with to behavior. And there we can use technology to detect the breeding sites, etc., and to take action. So I think similarly for agriculture, I think we need to produce more nutritious crops and make more dietary diversity available. Just eating only calories is not doesn't make someone healthy. In fact, we become very unhealthy as a result. So yes, we have the new technologies, but what are we trying to solve, and how can we do it to maximize the benefits to the most number of people? You see, the Western model of R&D is unfortunately driven by profits. And despite the fact that the governments invest so much in basic research, the fruits of that research essentially flow into private pockets, and particularly into big pharma. I think India needs a different model of R&D. Yes, government must invest much more in basic science. Definitely. Without that, private sector is not going to really make very risky investments. Only governments can take risk. And then you put high risk, you get high returns. Those returns must go to public good. So I think India can show a model of R&D where public good becomes our primary motivating factor. And for me, public health would be of highest importance, because without good health, no country can become a great economy. So I think that is a realization that really, I hope everybody will recognize that, because COVID saw trillions of dollars, not billions, but trillions of dollars of losses in GDP. But our day-to-day health is also affecting, like you get dengue or chikungunya, you're out of work for 10 days, right? That's a huge hit on the economy. If you start adding all those sick days up, I think we are underestimating the how much our ill health is going to cost. Diabetes, amputations, kidney dialysis, all of that is only going up. So without preventive health and health promotion, we're not going to. And we have Dr. Agashe in the first row here. So mental health we have to talk about, and aging and all the problems that come with that. That's also a huge issue which needs to be addressed. So both physical and mental health. Let's not forget mental health.
I was coming to that. We have to constantly bear in mind the mind body relationship. After all, mind is the content of the body. And too much emphasis on technology and body medicine without any reference to contextual thinking and feeling is not going to help us at all. Because at one end of the pole, if we go to preventive medicine, the best way to practice it is to prevent being born. Currently seeing the rate with the high progress of technology, we are gradually losing the ability of contextual thinking. We are thinking much more of a small thing we know and actually have lost the ability to know more about the perspective in which life, disease, and death has to be seen. And we never think, it is never taught to us that death is a part of life. We are born, and death and birth are born together, they live together, and they go together. And that passage, how healthy passage is possible? Purely healthy is an utopic concept. Nobody can be purely healthy at any point of time. Whether you can manage, you're functioning well. So the functional ability is far more important than the structural integrity. And that is precisely what is missing. And we have never taught. So, like, we still don't know the basic questions. One should die of what? When? And how? We're talking, I mean, the technology has completely controlled the birth and death registry. Because though technology has progressed, birth and registry, that has not progressed. It's still dependent on only two functions: respiration and pumping of heart. Both being controlled by medical marketing rather than medical research, fundamental research. And the human tendency to more abuse things than to use things. And the last sentence is, we are looking at nature as our enemy. It's not your enemy. You have to find out how to live with nature, not how to conquer nature. And how to live healthy, live with it. Even when the pandemic came, I disgusted the idea that the corona is an enemy. No. For me, corona was an emissary of the nature. For you to think that it's a guest. Live with the guest. We have lived with so many things. All diseases have been replaced by other diseases. So I don't think curing this is going to help, because new diseases will crop.
Yeah, but I think they are unwanted diseases and unwanted guests
No, but,
on that part.
but that will happen. Still, the life expectancy is going up.
Right.
In spite of that. So that is why, but
Sure,
much
sir,
more
that's a
complex
great
subject.
discussion. We shall-
But I think mind-body relationship has to be thought together and not separately.
There are two more questions coming up. I want Dr. Mashelkar first to just please tell us about the innovation that you've been talking about.
Yes, it is. This is an awardee of Anjani Mashelkar Foundation. Anjani Mashelkar Foundation has been working for last 13 years, and it is focusing on diagnostics. Prevention is better than cure, or less expensive and more desirable. And we look at diagnostics which are non-invasive, which are user-friendly, which are not affordable, highly affordable, not 10%, 10x, and high technology-based, accurate, basically, because no compromise. So one of the winners has been Shwasa. Shwasa is one where you take a smartphone and the artificial intelligence is used to train the audiometry to recognize just by the sound of the cough as to whether you're infected and what is it? Is it tuberculosis? Is it pneumonia? It is this, that, and the other. Spirometer is normally used, cost of 1.5 lakh. Here you have a smartphone, so the hardware cost is zero. Spirometer takes about 30 to 45 minutes. Here it is instant. And spirometer, because you require trained technicians, it costs around 1,000 rupees. Here it is 1 rupee, so as to say. And something like 300,000 tests have been done. It is the most important part of it is that all these awardees are high science based. Our most prestigious journal is Nature, and there are 2 papers in Nature on the deep science that they have used in order to sort of make it. So I talked to Dr. Soumya Swaminathan about this, and I'm very happy to see her endorsement that such technologies, which are non-invasive, affordable, and almost instant, and used by the user, that's what you are emphasizing, without the help, should be promoted. So that's the technology, and anybody who wants to know more about it, Anjani Mashelkar Foundation will give the results.
Thank you so much, sir. We have time for one or two questions. Can we have 2 questions? Yeah. I'll come to you, Dr. Dasmeet Singh, but this lady over here has been raising her hand. So we'll have 2 questions. A woman. Or can we just, if there is a commonality of the questions, can we just take, everybody ask their questions and then we can ask people to, the panelists to respond.
There are 3 aspects to it that as early as 1960, COVID was mentioned in JE Park, it's preventive medicine. But I think how it was an oversight, I do not know. This I came to know now. There are 3 aspects we have. One is diagnostic, one is treating, and the other is how to reach out to the people, especially in the rural areas. And preventive aspect, and there are 2 things which have been covered up. I think a lot has already been answered by Dr. Agashe, but we are living in a world of fear, psychosis, and stigma. These are the 2 things which prevents even educated people to come out with their problems. So how would you go further with this aspect?
Hi, I'm Dr. Dasmeet Singh, pediatric surgeon. My question is on a larger scale. With every emerging knowledge, we always have a parallel anti-knowledge lobby which starts off, their deliberations. For example, the more we talk about global warming, there's an anti-global warming thing that it's a big hoax. When we started off with, HIV, the same thing had happened. With COVID, again, the same thing has happened. So how do you go about tackling this issue? Because what happens is the real issue gets diluted. And because of that, our sites get sort of derailed. And so it's very important to tackle this anti-issue also. So how do we go about doing that? That's my question to all the panelists.
Hello, good evening, ma'am. I would like to listen from you. How was your experience of administering the research wheel?
Please introduce yourself.
I'm Pranav Wale. How was your experience of administering the wheel of research at WHO and ICMR? Can these 2 bodies learn from each other? That I would like to listen. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, yes, thank you for those questions. I'm sure that Dr. Gangakhedkar and Vinay will also want to pitch in. So I'll just quickly, I think that these first two questions were quite related. In fact, in February of 2020, the WHO did talk about what we call the infodemic. And in fact, the DG at that time had said that, yes, the world is facing a very bad viral epidemic. It was still not called a pandemic at that time. But equally dangerous, or even more dangerous, we're facing an infodemic, which was basically an over explosion of knowledge, information that was being spread through social media. It was the first pandemic in the social media age, and as you know, a lot of people today get their information from social media. In fact, I didn't realize how much. I was speaking to somebody from West Africa, a small West African country, French speaking, and they said that because the community there did not really trust their government. I mean, it was a very polarized kind of a situation. Most of the people got their information from WhatsApp. And so WhatsApp messages that are forwarded from different French-speaking countries around the world. That is what people were using as their base of information, not what their public health or their political leaders were telling them. And so there was a lot of misinformation circulating and disinformation. And I think, as you rightly said, there is, for some reason, a big anti-science lobby, and in case of vaccines, an anti-vaccine, very well organized lobby. Even before COVID, vaccines were actually developed. In the middle of 2020, the anti-vaccine lobby was actually very active. Before a single COVID vaccine had even appeared, saying that they're going to be terrible, they're going to do this, that, and the other, they're going to wipe out the world, they will inject things. There was even a crazy thing like Bill Gates is funding a lot of this. He's putting a chip into each vaccine, then he will control the world because the whole world will have. So these kind of absolutely crazy stories. And then we saw in many countries that this actually had an impact on vaccine uptake. India handled it very well. I think we also had pockets of vaccine hesitancy, but the public health officials, collectors, various people actually went, spoke with communities, religious leaders were brought on board, and other kinds of community leaders. And a lot of people were endorsing and talking about vaccine importance. But I know I've spoken to many people who were very hesitant, and then how you had to work. So it's an area actually for public health. It's going to be a serious concern. It already is. And I think part of it is not keeping people involved and informed. So often scientists or public health officials, we think that we should just tell people this is what you should do it, without realizing that everyone has questions, thinks about things, and they need to be treated also as intelligent people, and their questions need to be answered. And we shouldn't talk down to people. We should engage with people in a discussion. So I think the whole approach to communication and building health literacy, science literacy in the population, I think we have a long way to go. We have to start with school children. And it's not that everybody has to become a scientist or study science, but science literacy is a different concept where you learn to think critically and rationally. And then I think this one, it'll be very difficult for me to do justice, but I can only say that very different, of course, ICMR and WHO. WHO is an organization that's made up of 192 member states. So what you think of as WHO is a few people who work for the secretariat, but they only follow the instructions that the countries every year tell them during World Health Assembly, this is your program of work, go and do it and come back. And then the secretariat people who work there. For me, the experience was unique because I got an opportunity to set up the science division and really think about what a science division would do in WHO. And for me, there were three things we picked as priorities. One was WHO is a normative agency. It's a guideline setting recommendatory agency. It's one of the few normative agencies of the UN. It's very important for us to be based on evidence, on data, and use the latest and the best science and the best methodologies to use the science to then tell the world, okay, this is. So we learned all that during COVID in rapid speed, and so we tried to apply it across the work of WHO, strengthening the norms and standards work of WHO. So that was the one. Second was on research, and again we saw from sitting in WHO, you could see the huge mismatch between research capacity in the developed world and the developing world in terms of funding, in terms of human. So we said, how are we going to correct that mismatch? How can we get more research done on diseases, on populations that are now today being neglected and are out of research totally? So whole body of work on that. And the third area was digital health, and how digital health is going to make, and how countries are really needing the guidelines. Today, everybody is saying, what are the limits of AI? Will AI take over, and will it turn rogue, and will it start doing more harm than good? So you need to, whenever new technologies come, you also need to think about the ethical ways of using those technologies. So for me, WHO plays an important role in setting the ethical and regulatory guidelines, especially around new technologies, whether it's genomic or whether it's AI based. So that was WHO, and ICMR, of course, is the main funder of medical research in India. And so again, there's big gaps. I think we've discussed in our panel today. ICMR tries to fill those gaps, but it's hard. I think we need much more investment into both medical and scientific research in India.
On that note, I will also request you to please read the book. So you will find more details on that. And I will also ask Dr. Kulkarni and Dr. Gangakhedkar to just make one or two remarks before I conclude. Thanks.
Yeah, Dashmit's question, I think she mentioned a very critical word in the last sentence, that is ethical. The problem why people don't believe in science is probably because majority of the people feel that it's a vested interest, is for profit. So if it is coming from something, how are you going to convince someone? Because science is not a single thing that this works and that's why I am saying this, that's why it would work. But this whole thing about profit making, privatization, vested interest, competitions. So unless our research is also ethical and we all as a community are rational, this match is going to be a mismatch. And so this is eternal, like believers and non-believers, right to life, right to all these are going on, and those will keep on going on unless we are all on the same plane.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Gangakhedkar, would you like to say one line or so before I just wrap up this session?
I would just say whatever we have learned in the past, we need to bring it into practice and reality. Over.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Like I said, within 1 hour, it was very difficult, but it was very, very interesting. And I hope, like how ma'am has said in the book, that we are going to face multiple health challenges, but the way forward is in our policies, in our implementations, in investments, health education, community behavior change. And on that note, once again, Dr. Mashelkar, thank you so much for this panel.
Thank you, Anuradha. I now invite Dr. Mashelkar to felicitate our guests. Tejas. Dr. Gangakhedkar virtually. Last but not the least, our Anuradha Mascarenhas. So, on behalf of Pune International Center, I, Geeta Hosmani, would like to express our sincere thanks to Dr. Soumya Swaminathan for joining us today despite her busy schedule. We also appreciate Dr. Vinay Kulkarni and Dr. Raman Gangakhedkar for being the part of this panel. A special thank you to Dr. Mashelkar and Anuradha Mascarenhas for their presence here today. Lastly, I would like to thank all the participants for being here today. With this, I conclude today's session. Thank you very much.